Invention Education, Portrait Strategies, Starting Points is a series of podcasts intended to share interesting, inspiring, and actionable information about invention education. Sponsored by the Lemelson Foundation and supported by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, this series is one of many ways we're aligning to help ensure that students get the tools and support they need to invent a better tomorrow. My name is Jeremy Shore, and throughout this series, we'll be joined by families, students, and experts in the field who will share their own experiences and lessons learned. You can find me on Twitter at Jeremy Shore. And today I'm excited to learn more about the ways that invention education can prepare young people for the global challenges of today and tomorrow. And I hope you are too. In this episode of Portrait Strategy Starting Points, I'm joined by Clara Mabour, a high school educator in Oakland Park, Florida. Clara teaches biology, AICE marine science, and global perspectives at her alma mater, Northeast High School in Oakland Park. As a 2017 Lemelson MIT Invent Teams teacher, she advised a group of students who developed an invention that prevents mosquitoes from breeding in stagnant water. This invention currently has a patent pending status. More recently, Mabour advised a group of 8 students as they competed and became state winners in the Samsung Solve for Tomorrow competition. Mabour is passionate about invention education and creativity in the classroom. So in addition to teaching, she facilitates an after-school STEM club and a new group of young inventors and future scientists who are conducting independent and team research projects that address local and global challenges. Hi, Clara. I think that most educators get into education in part because they love being around young people. They love the practice of teaching, standing in a room, speaking some knowledge to these same young people. Can I sort of assume the same is true of you?
No. So actually growing up and even up until the very last second I became a teacher, I had a big fear of children. And it's not, I'm afraid that they're going to harm me, but I was more afraid of me influencing them in a potentially bad way or something, or yeah, and I guess I was a little afraid of them physically too. I've seen them do some interesting things. And then I started working for the city of Oakland Park in their after school programs, and I loved working with young people. It was exciting to go in every day and hear about the different stories they had and see their creativity unfold in front of me. And my Invent Teams teacher, when I was in high school, called me one day and she says, well, there's a job open, and I know that you're working with kids now, so maybe you'd be interested in applying. And I definitely doubted applying for a very long time. And this was at the high school that I actually attended as well. So I applied, and next thing I know, I am the awkward biology teacher making jokes about random things, and I enjoy it. Definitely a highlight of my day is working with my students every day.
Clara, that's awesome. And I love those stories when people come to teaching. Particularly, I think there's such value in teachers who come from backgrounds that are different than just sort of traditional teacher path. I'm going to be a teacher. I've known it since 3rd grade, and I would go, those teachers are incredible also, but a variety of experiences and backgrounds I think is so important to our kids. So we're here talking about invention education. And I wonder, obviously your students and you see value in invention education for the invention education's sake itself. So in the competition, that's fun. You learn some things. But I wonder what you think about the value of invention education outside of just that kind of narrow sphere, the impact of invention education on your students in things outside of competitions.
So in the classroom and within different content, the context of different content or subjects, invention education is important. So for my biology classes, I'll have my student, after I teach them about the parts of a flower, I'll have them invent their own flower, and to see them apply what they've already learned and then gather more skills like the prototyping, the research, the drafting skills, to create something that they thought was just a normal everyday object. Now they've turned it into something potentially extraordinary. They also get skills working with each other. So being able to collaborate with others is a very important skill in invention. So they get that aspect of invention education as well. The outside of the classroom though, so they can take these skills home as well. And what I find really important and beneficial to them is that they can see themselves as inventors and put themselves in that role, and they can bring their own interest into it too. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be an inventor. You can actually be a soccer player and want to invent a soccer ball that counts how many times you can dribble a ball without it dropping to the ground. Like, that's something that they can do on their own. So embedding invention education in the classroom will lead into that field for them. So that field of just being excited about it and wanting to do it on their own. And I've seen that happen actually, where students will, I'll give them a project in class, something random, of course, always random. It can't be predictable because it's fun out of it for the teacher really sometimes. So they'll come back with something else that it was not intended for them to create. They'll just bring back something, and they'll show me, and I'm like, oh, whoa, dude, I had no idea this is something you were even interested in.
So you're kind of clearly in the conversation we've had so far, and we talked a little bit before we started, a creative person. Did you grow up in a creative household, or is this something that kind of came to you later?
So I absolutely did grow up in a creative household. My father is an artist. My mom was a seamstress. She designed clothes for, and I was also born in Haiti. So I remember my mom had a whole shop where people would come in and she designed clothes for them. My dad is definitely highly creative. So having that kind of environment where I could have the freedom to explore that part of my mind it just made me who I am today. And there was a period in my life where I kind of neglected that part of me because I wanted to focus strictly on the academic parts of my life. And then it wasn't until college, I'd say maybe my second year of college, after I'd gotten too stressed out from whatever else I was doing, I decided to get back into painting and some of my creative hobbies as well. So, and I'm still doing that now.
Are those your pieces behind you?
Yes.
So if you're listening to this, the audio only version, check out the YouTube version, because there's some beautiful pieces behind Clara that you can see. I'm curious. So you're born in Haiti. You kind of had this creative background. Came to the U.S. eventually. When you were in middle school, high school, were you able to compete in science, invention, those types of things, competitions yourself?
So high school, I started competing in science fair in high school. My senior year was my first time doing that. And then that same year, I also worked on a Lemelson MIT Inventions project with one of my teachers and a group of my friends. So we invented a emergency shower and water filtration system for natural disasters. And it was modeled after what had happened in Haiti in 2010. So we found that people couldn't use the water because of the cholera. So that invention actually ended up at the White House Science Fair in 2013. While I was in college, two of my teammates got to go to the White House Science Fair. And there's a video of President Obama riding this bike. And I'm like, why would the Secret Service allow him to get on this thing? I don't know. But it's just so awesome to see like something that I worked on with my friends end up at the White House.
It's amazing. And I think those are the types of experiences that invention education allow. I mean, obviously not everyone's going to get a patent or get to go to the White House, but that experience of being able to address a problem that's real to you, in your community, in your family, in your country, in your whatever is important and real to you is so rare, I think, in education. So much of education is, just kind of this fixed curriculum, and you learn these things and you talk about problems, but you solve problems, but they're not your problems.
Yeah. This brings me back to the question you asked earlier about invention education and what role it plays in my students' lives. In my global perspectives class, my students actually are looking at global and local issues and are developing solutions to those issues. So it's mostly a humanities class, but I've started to include invention education and the sciences into it and giving them that option for solving these problems as well. So when they enter the class, they'll mostly work on maybe policies that they would put in place. And by the end, some of them have full-blown invention ideas that they can use to solve some of these problems. So just the possibilities of invention education is so vast. And then something else I get to remind my students is an invention doesn't necessarily always have to be a physical product. Sometimes it's a process that people haven't even considered before. So I can then that part of invention education allows me to apply it to other topics or classes and subjects that I may want to teach as well. So it's just so open, and it takes quite a bit of planning, and maybe a little bit of diabolical, like something to spark that interest and to get those ideas chugging along with them. But once it gets started, it's like a flywheel on a fishing reel. It goes on its own until you have to just push a little bit more. But
And I love those stories. I love the stories of people who get involved in these different types of thinking. Invention education, being one of them, but that are sort of maybe initially designed as kind of a narrow standalone thing, but the way it sort of bleeds into your general instruction and the way that you teach and learn. The experiences that you had on the Invent team as a student, the experiences that you've had now, I wonder if you think about, your biology content. You talked a little bit about this a second ago, but think about like your biology content. How is that invention mindset shaping your instruction in kind of more typical classes?
so I definitely do not have the traditional approach to teaching, like, at all, and this was evident from day one. My students from my first year teaching, day one teaching, at the end of the school year, they told me that I was the most awkward teacher they had when they first got there. But the methods that I used to teach them the topics were new to them, and it was engaging to them. So um, they hadn't had the opportunity to completely invent something on their own before. Usually it was very strict prompts, or they were doing worksheets or listening to PowerPoints, and I definitely am not the PowerPoint teacher. It makes me it brings out my awkwardness definitely to higher levels. So the way that I teach is almost fully hands-on in the classroom. And even before the pandemic started, some of my classes were I ran them almost like hybrid classes where they were learning the content kind of on their own. So when they came to class, we were doing things and getting involved in making something, designing something. I use a lot of design in my class, and I also got familiar with design thinking recently, and that's something that I'm looking to incorporate more of in my class as well. But it definitely, my teaching style is changed. It's changing and evolving as I gather more skills. But I definitely do not have a traditional approach at all.
Yeah, and don't get mad at me if you're a traditional core teacher listening right now. But I stand by this idea that content, the traditional standards content, it's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but also if I were to write down everything I could remember from kindergarten through 12th grade, it would probably only take me like 3 pages of paper to write down everything I could remember. But those bigger concepts, learning how to learn, learning how to find problems, learning how to solve problems, these are the things that pay dividends not only in college, but in careers from manufacturing to law. And everywhere in between. These are kind of those skills that I think are so critical. And it sounds like it's a focus for you too, to make sure your students are leaving with those skills. So Clara, I am working from home these days in COVID world, like everyone is. And I'm looking out the window behind me that you can't see at my neighbor's backyard. He's got this creek. And it's really beautiful, and these herons come and land there, and that's awesome. But also the water barely moves in this creek. And so at night in my backyard, it is you can't see for the mosquitoes. So I've got to know, because the best thing I've found so far was installing a bat house in the yard, which did make a difference. But I've got to hear more about this solution that your students invented for the mosquito problem.
So back in 2017, we were in the thick of things with Zika. So my students thought of different ways we could approach this issue of mosquitoes and their ability, them being vectors for diseases. And the biggest fact, or the most important fact that changed things for the course of the project, was learning that mosquitoes can breed in a bottle cap of water. So if there is just the slightest bit of water out, they can find a way to lay eggs in there. And another cool fact about mosquitoes is that they can lay eggs, and those eggs can stay dormant for quite a long time until the conditions are perfect. And then they'll hatch, and then next thing you know, you're swimming through mosquitoes to get to your pool at night. So with that, we know that the mosquito larvae and pupae can't attach to, they need to attach to the surface of the water in order to get oxygen. And so the water has to be still for that to happen. So my students thought, well, what if we disrupt the surface of the water? What if we break up that surface tension and make it so that the mosquito larvae can't attach to the surface and just float around? So then they created the Mosquito Agitator, which is quite a simple solution. It basically just keeps the water moving. But the components in the device and learning how to code and running, correct electrical lines and whatnot was very important, and that added to the skills that they built from that project. But them being able to find such a simple solution to this issue was I don't know what to say about that, but it was definitely a really great learning moment, and it's something that continues to benefit them till this day. So now they have a patent pending status on this invention.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah.
That's such an incredible experience. Our kids are so much better the younger they are at thinking outside of the box, thinking divergently. And through school, we have a tendency to sort of crush that out of them. But it's amazing when that's not what's happening, when it's the opposite, when it's saying, think of something crazy. I also always love this idea of, if you had gone to those same students and said, hey, want to learn like how to run electrical lines? Some of them might have said, oh yeah, that's something new, cool. And some of them might have said, well, no, why do I care? But when they come to you with this need, they create something that now has the need. Students are so much more interested and focused on gaining and learning that knowledge that I think it makes such a big impact. So I'm sure that you've got students who are rock stars, and they jump into this type of education and they just love it. But I wonder about students who are a little more hesitant, students who aren't super motivated learners, how Invention Education impacts those students.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think having or giving students the opportunity to dabble in this type of education will make a difference for them. Whether it's them becoming more familiar with their learning style and what they enjoy in education, or them finding out that they absolutely love Invention Education, it will make a difference. And another teaching story for me was when I first started teaching this Global Perspectives class, my students definitely were not used to having so much freedom and creative freedom, especially. They're like, are you sure I can design this how I want to design? I'm like, yeah, go ahead. So I gave a project one day, and one of my students, she's like freaking out in the corner. I'm like, hey, are you okay? She's like, I'm too institutionalized for this. And that is my favorite line ever.
That is the greatest student quote I have ever heard. I'm probably going to steal and I'll credit you when I'm talking to people.
Yeah, so she had realized that for her 11 years of education in the public school system, that she hadn't been able to explore that part of her. And it was kind of like, it's like a muscle, right? So you have to practice creativity. You have to practice invention and just using your mind in these novel ways. But if you're forced in this box all the time or you're forced to think linearly and to think inside of the box, it's something that you have to rebuild. So for students who are hesitant, a lot of the approach on the educator side has to be with building that confidence for them, letting them know that they're capable of doing this, that they can use what they're interested and to get involved. And some students don't, they still don't care for it, and that's perfectly fine, but they have to have, they should have the option of being able to participate or not. And then the other thing I find interesting is when their friends are involved, it's like a magnet. And a lot of the groups that I get with students working on these kinds of projects, they actually they get involved because they see their friends participating in it. So and it's not peer pressure either.
Yeah,
it's just that
it's
they're like,
excitement.
oh, exactly, yeah. So they see somebody they hang out with all day, and they meet up with at lunch, and they're talking about this project. They're like, oh, that's cool, can I come, stop by and see what you're doing? And they stop by, and then they don't leave, and that's my favorite part. I love it when they come in. And this is after school, but during school, once again, building that confidence, and then providing them the skills. So the other thing with the confidence is they may not have had the opportunity to learn some of the skills that they need. So skills like just a simple learning how to draw simple diagrams, straight lines, and whatnot. Those things build confidence as well. So I get students that come in, they're like, I can't draw, or I don't know how to do science. So just showing them that, hey, you're capable of doing this, and look how simple this thing is. You can totally do it. You'll get some kids on board as well. And then I also found that relating, definitely the issues that you start them off with have to be things that mean something to them. And it's not all the time that an issue you present to them is like a big global issue that is pressing to them. Sometimes it's just going back to the soccer ball idea. Hey, I have the soccer ball. I play soccer, competitively for school. While I'm practicing, I want to know how I'm improving on my dribbles. So, oh, cool. Well, why don't you invent a soccer ball that can count how many times it hits your foot before it, touches the ground, and then figuring out. And then from there, they'll figure out the internal workings of it. So once they get bitten by that bug, it's just that interest and excitement just keeps growing and growing and blooming, really.
I think you touched on something that's really important that frankly, sort of surprisingly, doesn't get touched on a lot, which is that confidence aspect. This is not something that our students are accustomed to. So not only, like you were mentioning, do we have to build their confidence so that they can do it, but then that becomes very cyclical too, and we build their confidence so that they can invent. The invention itself then builds their confidence further. So just being part of that process, what I see when I talk to students, again, there are some rock stars who they've had everything figured out since they were 4 years old, and that's wonderful. But the exciting part is when you talk to students who say, I never really found myself fitting anywhere educationally. I was never excited about school, maybe to see my friends, but nothing beyond that. And now I know I can do this. I can find problems. I can solve problems. And that's what I think is most exciting. All right, Clara, I want to ask you the same question we've been asking everybody at the end here. What to you, Clara, is the power of Invention Education?
Ooh, okay. So I think about the benefits that I've had in my life from Invention Education. I think about my students that I've had in the past who've gone through projects with me. And then I think about their future. And I think that the power of Invention Education is helping students and teachers and stakeholders and parents recognize that the future is not, or the future economy, society, all of that is not, it's not going to be made up of people who think linearly and who follow strict rules and guidelines. The future is going to be wildly creative, and people have to be able to adapt and develop things on their own. So the power of Invention Education to me is its ability to empower students and parents and everybody involved in this idea to create, and to create with a purpose of serving others in your community. It could even be people in your home or people from the other side of the globe. But just giving them that power and confidence to do that is, to me, the power of Invention Education. And of course, the ability to provide provide solutions to global and pressing issues.
Future's not made up of people following rules and doing A because of B. It's made up of people who are solving problems, who are finding novel solutions. Clara, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for listening to Invention Education Portrait Strategy Starting Points, brought to you by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice and the Lemelson Foundation. Thank you, Clara, for joining me today. Please visit www.stemecosystems.org to hear more inspiring stories. My name is Jeremy Shore, and thank you for joining us.